Okay, so welcome everyone to the January webinar. There's only a couple of you on right now. So as we go through this, I mean, I'm okay and I'm sure Susan's okay. If you have a question, you can just go ahead and kind of just unmute yourself and just ask. Probably be easiest since looks like there's just 3 joining us live. So I'm going to apologize in advance in case this seems a little, I'm a little delirious. So I've had to come to Beaufort. My daughter got really sick. We've been up since 4 and Susan's son has a concussion. So we've had a really exciting 2 days for us on top of everything else. So we may be a little loopier, right? Is that a good word, Susan? Loopier than normal. So just bear with us.
Loopier may work for us right now.
Yeah, loopier is a little good. I know we're both got a lot going on outside of work today. So today's webinar is purely and strictly on time and effort. We did this last year. We went over this stuff, but with January submissions coming due, we have a new process and procedure for the district. It's gone out in operators' notes and stuff. We just wanted to take this month to just review this fairly quickly, and then again, if you have questions, please just jump in and ask us, or you can always email us if you'd like. So today we're basically going to go over information that's being shared is mainly from the Department of Ed on requirements for time and effort and the use of our federal funds, and then we're going to talk a little bit more on our submission requirements and our new process that we've put in place this year. So some of you have submitted some January time and efforts, and a couple of you have had it rejected, and hopefully after today you'll understand why it was sent back to you. So overall, we all know that some of the challenges with time and effort is that a large percentage of our federal funds are used for staffing, especially our IDA. A lot of you use it for staff, which is okay, but it also causes some challenges with the documentation. There tends to be some staff turnover, the responsibility of who's supposed to do what. Is it you as the coordinator? Is it the school leader who should be doing this? Is it the finance person who should be doing this? All that comes into question when we start looking at this. Sometimes there's not very good communication between, for instance, you as the coordinator and your finance folks, especially if your finance folks are out staffed, like maybe McKay Kitties, and they don't talk to you specifically, but they talk to the school leader. There's a variety of situations out there. We understand that, and it can become very overwhelming when looking at time and effort documentation. So we're hopefully going to make this as painless as possible. Overall, people don't like it. I mean, Susan, this is one of our favorite things, right? I'm kidding. Are you there, Susan?
Yes, I just keep on muting myself so you can't hear anything in my house.
Oh,
but yeah,
okay.
This is one of those things that if it's done correctly, it's very smooth. And if not, it causes a lot of people headaches.
Yeah, and it causes us headaches like it causes you guys headaches, so we're right there with you. There also is sometimes a misunderstanding of the requirements. So again, hopefully this little webinar is going to help you all maybe understand a little bit more and what's required. So as you can see, when we're looking at time and effort, there are policies. Of course, it's always state regulated, and there's the regulation from the state. Our records and wages and salaries and all of that have to accurately be reflected in what's submitted and the work performed. So for us, that means, and for you, for those of you using IDA funds for salary, you have to submit what's called a semi-annual certification every 6 months. So that's January and June. And that's for any employees working 100% of the time in the grant program. That is not that 100% of their salary is paid out of the funds you received. It's that 100% of their time is spent in special education. So there's a difference between the percentage of salary that's paid with it and the percentage of time. This time and effort is just as it says, and is strictly looking at the amount of time spent working in that grant. For those of you who may do other things, so for example, like me, I spend part of my time in IDA, and I also spend part of my time in CATE. So I work in 2 different federal programs. So each month I submit what's called a PAR, a personal activity report, documenting the time I'm spending in each program and what I'm doing. So that's what a PAR is. So if you are doing things in 2 different grants, and we'll go through in a little bit what some of those may be, you would actually do a PAR, not a semi-annual. So here again is the time and effort regulation. And it's just basically saying again that time, they must be required, and if an employee is paid with federal funds, then it has to be obviously somebody working in that grant. So who must participate? Again, any employee who's working on that federal program. It's not for contractors. It's only for employees paid with federal funds. So it's not like your contract folks. They wouldn't submit a semi-annual. Okay. So an employee with work funded 100% by the single objective or federal grant. So here are your guidelines again. It must be completed every 6 months, January and June. It has to be signed by the employee and the supervisor with direct knowledge of work being performed. So, you know, for example, like Susan or I could sign your time or effort in semi-annual because we don't directly oversee you in the school building. It is an after the fact distribution, so you get reimbursed after that money has been spent. It has to account for 100% of the employee's activity, and it must be signed within 15 calendar days of the last day of the timeline. So, for example, December 31st was the last timeline. So that time and effort, that semi-annual, has to be signed by January 15th. You have till January 20th to submit an epicenter. The signature has to be by January 15th. So that makes sense. Here's what our semi-annual looks like. I think Susan updated it and put a new one on the support site, but it is a Word. Yeah, I think it's still a Word document unless you've made it a PDF. So, you know, the important thing is do not cross out, don't write, you know, don't cross out here and put 2019 and then put, you know, don't change those dates. Word document, you can edit it. We shouldn't see any crossouts. Here's where the signature goes. Here's where the printed name goes. Here's where the date goes, okay? This date should be after this date. So we shouldn't see this signed like December 1st and the semi-annual going to December 31st, right? It has to be after the fact, not before.
And the other thing with that is don't have it signed like December 31st, but submit it a week before that date.
Right, because then we'll know, oh, wait a minute, they really didn't sign it December 31st. They signed it December 15th and we did have a few schools do that, and we understand that you want to get it done before you went home for the holiday. But this is something that unfortunately, you know, Epicenter timestamps everything. So when you submit it to the state and they see it, they're like, oh, wait a minute. This was actually submitted a week before it really happened. So it has to be after the fact. Right, so here's the single certification again. It's just a little bit bigger. Where we see some errors mostly are in this date, like Susan and I just talked about, or that we don't have signatures or the written name. So make sure they're signed and they're dated properly. Otherwise, they will be sent back to you. So the PAR, like our favorite thing to do, and I say that sarcastically because it's really not. And we know it's really a challenge, but this is something, if this applies to you or someone in your building, it has to be completed and should be completed monthly and submitted monthly. So whoever's, you know, you can get reimbursed monthly for your PAR, but it should be submitted monthly. If not, if you're going to do it like January and June, like the semi-annual, that's fine. You can do that too. But remember, you have to have the documentation for all those months as well. You have to have those PARs for, you know, if you do January, we're going to be looking for July, August, September, October, November, and December's PAR. So you'll have to submit those 6 months worth of PARs as well. So it might be easier to do monthly. I do it monthly for my own sake because it is easier for me to keep up with that way. Again, this must be signed by the employee and the supervisor who has direct knowledge of your work. It's an after the fact. It's after the work is done. It's accounting for 100% of the time. And the same rule applies, so it has to be signed no later than 15 days. So if you're doing the month of December, which ends on 12/31, that PAR has to be signed no later than January 15th. It must be signed by the employee and the supervisor. Here is an example of one. Again, there's a couple examples. My recommendation, and I know this will be Susan's too, if you are a person or you have an individual who has to do a PAR, reach out to whichever one of us directly supports you all, and we will help you work through that. It's easier if you ask us on the front end of what this should look like versus after you submit everything and we see it. So if you're not sure, just reach out and ask us, and we can, meet with you and talk with you and kind of go through it. But you can see here, we need like a schedule for each day and what's happening. So if this person, for example, was split between IDA funds and Title I, you can see we've got resource, which would be for our special ed students. And then we also have what's happening here with the Title I. So that's the detail level that we need. We need a total percentage and hours that are being worked in the two programs. That's something we've seen. Okay, here's a blank example of it, and I believe it's also on our Google site. But let me go back here. Oops, maybe. Yeah, there, I'm going to go back. The important thing is to make sure that you're filling this out. So you have the date and the year, you have the two programs that you're being shared with, and then you have that percentage of breakdown, the dates and the activities, and then your total numbers. Those are things that we tend to see things forgotten. So make sure when you're doing a PAR that you complete it completely. Complete it completely. So basically the whys is that, we have to have internal control that provides the state assurance that we are properly allocating and that the funds are being spent according to what they're allowed to be spent. Right? All of these documents that you submit go into official records. They're always reviewed for audits. A few weeks ago, actually before break, right? Susan, it was before break. We're in the middle of a financial audit. It's not an IDA audit, but it's a general audit for the district. And Susan and I had to gather all of this information and submit it to the auditors. So your PARs, your annuals, your payroll, all of that was submitted to auditors to review. So we don't just collect it and hold it because we have nothing else to do. It's used for auditing purposes, so the state can ensure that we, in fact, are doing the right thing. Right, so it shouldn't be more than 100% of the time. Again, it's in line with our policies and practices. Of course, anything you submit should support the payroll that is. If there's payroll charges, thank you.
Hey, Laura.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can go in and mute. A bunch of people have gotten on, but maybe mute them all because there's a lot of background noise.
Okay. So I'm going to mute everybody. Okay, is that better?
It's perfect.
Okay. Okay, so let me go back here. Oh, I'm like way ahead of myself now. Whew. Okay, so let's go back to the why. So again, it's to make sure that your time and effort, your PAR is to make sure that those payroll match the actual distribution. Again, we must have a system of control. The state must have a system of control. Everybody's got to have a little bit of control. So here's what our requirements are. Again, our time and effort policies, I think they already are on the Google site. All of our submissions will go through Epicenter. As you know, the tasks and reminders are created in Epicenter. The submissions are due by the 20th of each month for the PAR, and then by January 20th and June 20th for your semi-annuals. And like I said before, any incomplete submissions will be rejected and you'd have to resubmit. So you want to make sure you're reviewing that documentation before you actually submit it. So here's what's new and exciting, right? Oh, we're so excited about this. So this year we have implemented a cover sheet. Since we have so many programs and so many different folks submitting reimbursement requests and PARs and semi-annuals and supplies and materials and all of that stuff, we in our department, the federal programs team, have come up with a cover sheet to help us organize those submissions a little bit. So in order, the first thing you have to know is that in order for any of your semi-annuals or PARs or anything, contract services, supplies, materials, anything like that to be accepted in Epicenter, a cover sheet must accompany it. If not, it will be rejected. So if you've submitted some things before today or without knowing about this cover sheet, it was probably or should have been rejected and sent back to you, and you should have gotten a note that says, please use new cover sheet. This is exactly what we're talking about. So we're going to walk through this cover sheet. So we go through it so you know exactly what you have to do. And then for any submissions from this point on, please make sure this cover sheet is utilized. So the first step, clearly, and I know it sounds silly, is to read the directions. So I know that sounds silly to say that, but there are a lot of people who just look at it and say, I don't know what to do, or I'm not sure what to do. And the first question Susan and I will always ask is, well, did you read the directions? Right? So the first thing is to read it, which it tells you complete a separate cover sheet for each reimbursement request. Attach the cover sheet to all supporting evidence in the appropriate Epicenter submission. This form must be attached as a cover sheet to all reimbursement requests. Failure to do so will result in submission rejection. So the first thing you're going to do over here is pick what the grant year is, and then you're going to pick the grant, and it's just a matter of clicking the right box. So you can see there's lots of them out there. You know, our focus for you all obviously is going to be IDEA. And then, so you would, and then down on the bottom, I apologize, my screen moved, where it says copy activity from approved application, that's where you're going to write, for example, Mary's salary for Mary Smith sped coordinator. So your request for reimbursement has to match the budget you submitted that we approved for what you're going to do with those funds. So hopefully that makes sense. So here's step 2. So then you're going to choose the type of reimbursement. Is it payroll? Is it salary? Is it benefits? Is it an invoice, mileage, meals, or whatever else? And then you need to put the amount to be reimbursed. So if it's salary, you need to add up those payroll submissions you're showing and put the amount that you're asking to be reimbursed at that minute. It's not going to be the amount of your total approved budget. I mean, I guess it could be if you have a limited IDA grant. But if it's not and it's only partial, you need to total up what that amount to be reimbursed is. So you also then remember you need to supply that documentation. So you'd fill out this cover sheet, check that. For salary, you'd include your time and effort as well as your payroll. For supplies and materials, you'd need to include this, the invoice for the supplies, and the proof of payment, whether it's a credit card statement, a copy of a check, whatever. We need to see that proof of payment for supplies and materials. Same thing with contract services. So if it's for like outside speech therapy or a contracted speech therapist, we'd need to see the invoice and then proof that you all have paid that speech therapist. The next step is to choose a submission type. So what are you choosing? Be sure under programmatic documentation financial, you write what you're including. For example, program would be you type under here semi-annual certification, and the documentation you could type payroll register. Okay, there's an example. And then you click the box, payroll register, time and effort. Is it a semi-annual? Is it a PARS employee? And then if it's another thing like purchase contract services, you know, if it is over $2,500, did you go through procurement? You're including your invoice, your proof of payment. So whatever it is, you need to make sure that you check what you're including in your documentation. And that's it for the cover sheet. So it's really not that hard. It's not that involved. It's just really to help us better understand what's coming through Epicenter. you know, and again, remember, if it's not attached into your Epicenter submission, it's going to be rejected and sent back to you. So from this point on, you need to use this cover sheet for any submissions for reimbursement. So just a reminder, oh, I don't know why my computer's doing that. So just reminders, the semi-annual is completed every 6 months. The PAR should be, best practice would be completed, submitted monthly. If you want to do it every 6 months, you can. Just make sure you're including the 6 months worth of that schedule like we showed. So there's some information and forms found on our sites. It's all there like typical, usual. So some commonly asked questions and scenarios we come across. So let's say we have an individual who is serving as a school psychologist and the SPED coordinator. So do they fill out a semi-annual or do they fill out a PARS? Well, they would fill out a semi-annual because 100% of their time was in special ed because it did include initial evaluations. Let's say, and we see this a lot with you all, someone who serves as a SPED coordinator and RTI coordinator. So that actually would be a PAR because not all of their time is spent in special ed. RTI or MTSS is a general education initiative and should be paid out of general ed funds, not out of special ed funds. So if you're one of those folks, you should be completing a PARS, not a semi-annual. Another one we've come, oh, I don't know why they're all ones. I just noticed that. What if IDA funds only cover 50% of the SPED teacher or coordinator salary and general funds cover the remainder? That is a semi-annual. General funds is not a federal grant program or anything, so that's still a semi-annual. It's about the amount of time you're spending working in that grant program. Does that make sense? I hope so. So that's really it in terms of this little, I know it was short and sweet. We tried to make it short and sweet and just give you the bare bones of it. So if you have questions, please feel free to ask us. And you can do that through your chat box. Let's see. I see a chat question. Oh. Elizabeth, you're good. We muted you. Susan, did you have anything you wanted to add or did I miss anything?
No, just make sure that if you guys have questions, instead of just submitting something and seeing if it sticks, make sure you touch base with Laura and I, just so that we don't have you guys submitting something being rejected and having to submit it again. Because another thing on our process is when something is rejected, our process is that we put in the building leader and then have it, the person who submitted it gets that rejection and clarification of what needs to be submitted. So just make sure, don't hesitate to call or email us or text us and ask clarifying questions.
Especially with the PAR. I mean, that can be really confusing. So Elizabeth, the reimbursement cover page is not attached in Epicenter. It actually went out to school leaders in the operator's notes. And I believe it was attached. You can find it. Susan, have you put it on our support site?
I did put it on there, but I realized, I think I put it on there as a PDF. And so, because some people can take a PDF and put it into a Word doc. So what I'll do is I'll attach it also as a fillable file. Okay. So you'll have it as a PDF or a fillable file. Okay. And then that way you guys, if you want to print it off and write on it and submit it, or if you want to do it on your computer and then upload it that way, it's done both ways.
There you go. So it will be on there. So like Elizabeth, I know you submitted one, so it was sent back because we need to do the, we need that cover sheet. So Robin, your question, the contract psychologist and speech pathologist are paid 100%, which is completed. You wouldn't complete a semi-annual or a PAR for a contract person. You would submit their invoice and your documentation of payment to those folks. The only time you're going to complete a PAR or semi-annual is if they're fully employed staff by the school, meaning they're hired by the school directly. They're not contracts. Oh, Taylor Hunt wants to learn how to make a fillable form, Susan.
Hey, Taylor, that's in our side gigs, okay? Maybe, I agree, they're pretty fun. But I cannot take the credit. Laura and I did not make this one. This cover page, we offered input on it, and we all as a team approved it. But actually, Tracy Sweet, who does other federal programs like Title I, II, III, and IV, she did this fillable form. So, but yeah, I agree with you.
We will get directions on how to do that, and we will share our knowledge, Taylor and Tiffany, because Tiffany Robinson asked the same thing.
Yeah.
We will be happy to share our knowledge with you all. Keep in mind too, I don't know if you all know or have been told, this coming Monday, we have a very exciting and I guess exciting is the best word, training that'll be happening at the district office. Hopefully your school leaders told you about it. It is all about finance and federal programs. Susan and I will be there, as well as Tracy Sweet. Melissa Huey will be there. Emily Paul will be there. So it is a full-fledged training on finances and federal grants. So it should be enthralling and just a great time. So if your school leader hasn't told you about it, you might want to ask to see if you might be able to tag along. And that's this Monday, the 13th. Then also remember on January 30th, right? The 30th is our face-to-face.
Yes.
We are very excited to see everybody. Oh, I should have said this to start. Happy New Year to everyone. We hope you all had a great New Year and a great vacation. Susan and I took a little bit of time off, so that was good. We both had some family in, got to have a little fun. Any other questions? Okay, so it's kind of crickets, so I'm going to stop recording this right now. Hopefully I actually pressed record. I did.